a very good evening. It is 7:04 on LBC. Tonight we are coming from Glasgow, sunny Glasgow, I'm going to say, because it's actually quite warm here today. And the reason is that we have Nicola Sturgeon with us for the first hour of the programme. Now, we're also streaming this, so if you want to watch us, you can do so on Global Player. The reason that we have Nicola with us is, as you may be aware, she has published her autobiography. It's called Frankly. It's got I have to say, I think this is one of the best book covers I've seen this year. Nicola, welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me on.
Now, people always think that a work of autobiography is a work of fiction about yourself. That's what's often said. And I think a lot of politicians find it a very challenging thing to do, to be honest in an autobiography, to admit where they've got things wrong as well as say where they've got things right. When you were writing this book, how did you decide what to put in, what to leave out? Because there's a lot of personal stuff in here, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, I guess an admission, first of all, I'm not a massive fan of political memoirs. I find them very often. I know you do, you're a geek. God, I shouldn't have insulted you at the very start of the interview. But I often find them a bit kind of tedious and turgid. So I didn't want to write something like that. It's for others to judge whether I've succeeded or not. And, you know, I've lived my life in the public eye. That's been my choice. It's not a complaint. And people talk about my life and there's endless caricatures of me out there. So I wanted to put my story into my words. It's my story from my perspective. So it's not a work of fiction, obviously, but it's subjective. It's the world and, you know, my career and my life is as I see it. And the decision on what to keep in and what to leave out was a difficult one. I mean, obviously, as well as being a personal story, this is an account of an extraordinary 3 decades in Scottish and UK political history. So I wanted to cover all of the big events that, you know, I had a unique vantage point on, and the events that had a big impact on me personally. So I think the book I've published, you know, people can make up their own minds about it, but I've covered everything that felt to me to be material and meaningful to my political and personal story.
One of the running themes of the book is your shyness, that you're an introverted person, that you suffer from massive imposter syndrome, and we'll talk about that in a lot more detail in a moment. But why on earth did you pick a career in politics if that was the way that you're built?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question, and I don't know that I have, even now at 55 years old, the perfect answer to that. As a child, I was, and I tried to explain this in the book, and, you know, lots of people will identify with this, I think. I was a walking contradiction. I was really shy. You know, I preferred to have my nose in a book than to be out playing with friends. But alongside that, and it's really hard to articulate this without making myself sound, you know, a bit arrogant, because that was not, you know, where it came from. I had this sense that I was going to do something in life that was a bit out of the ordinary. So I had these two, you know, competing sort of pressures, you know, the desire to hide away under a table with a book and the desire to sort of go and do something, you know, out of the ordinary.
And you were found under a table reading a book at your fifth birthday.
I mean, to be fair to me, I didn't want a fifth birthday party. My mother insisted, and my friends were playing party games, and I was under a table with a book.
I locked myself in the toilet at my fifth birthday party.
We have something almost in common. I think, you know, at 55, there's plenty of days when I prefer to hide under a table with a book. So that contradiction has always been in me, and I've had to work really hard to overcome the former in order to do the latter. And you know, coupled with that has been this, you know, lack of confidence, the wee voice in my head, what people would call imposter syndrome. I think I reached a point in life when I went from seeing that as a bit of a handicap to actually being a bit of a superpower. I think if you've got a natural shyness, a lack of confidence, but you want to push yourself to do things, you end up working harder than you would otherwise, and perhaps achieving more than you would otherwise. So I think it's worked out okay for me. But, you know, even today, I'm much happier. I use the phrase in the book, which, you know, I don't claim original authorship of, but I use the phrase public introvert. I am very comfortable standing on a stage talking to thousands of people. I'm much less comfortable in a room with 10 people having to make small talk. And again, you know, while not everybody goes and does the big public facing jobs that I've done, I think more people than we might appreciate will identify with that sort of contradiction.
I think there is a lot of that in a lot of people in the public eye,
Yeah,
not just in politics.
I agree.
I mean, I think Theresa May
Well, Theresa May, having interacted with Theresa May while I was First Minister, of the 5 Prime Ministers that I did work with, the one that I had the greatest respect for, but I think she is also very introverted, and a lot of how she presented, although I disagreed with her politically, I could absolutely identify with, because I think it came from that same place of shyness and introversion.
Well, we'll come back a lot more to that, because I think a lot of people who suffer from imposter syndrome particularly, I think, get over it after a time. But reading the book, I'm not sure you ever really have. I mean, even at big moments in your political life, you seem to be very unconfident in yourself, but you managed to mask that from the public. Because I was genuinely surprised by a lot of this. Now, I mean, we don't know each other well. I've met you 3 times, I think. But I was very surprised at you saying all of that.
I think people are surprised. And the older I've got and the further I've advanced in politics, understandably, it gets more difficult to convince people that I'm this little shy wallflower. And I get that. But I think... I don't know if people do ever completely get over imposter syndrome. Maybe they think they do or claim to do. I just wonder if that's true. I mean, for me, it wasn't something that held me back. It was something... I'm not saying there was no downside to it, but I think there was more of an upside to a downside, because it probably did make me think more about decisions I was taking, wrestle more with decisions. It probably made the process of decision making harder for me. But, maybe the world would be a slightly better place if more senior leaders had a dose of imposter syndrome. I don't know.
Do you think it held you back initially?
It did. It held me back initially, I think. I got involved in politics at a very young age, but I was going to SNP meetings probably for a year or more before I uttered a word at them. I was desperate to be there and to be part of it, but I just couldn't get the words out. So it held me back for a bit. Somebody, and I'm sure we'll come on to talk about him later on, that played a part in helping me get over it, because he pushed me on and gave me a belief in myself, before I really felt it, was Alex Salmond in my earlier days. So, it probably made it harder for me back then. And there's ups and downs to it, but I think I've preferred in recent years to kind of focus on the positives of it, that, it's driven me on in a way that might not otherwise have been the case.
You were interested in politics in your childhood. You talk in the book about you knocked on an SNP candidate's door and sort of said, can I help? But again, you and I have something in common. Margaret Thatcher inspired us to get involved in politics, but in slightly different ways.
Different reason. Obviously, I was a kid when Margaret Thatcher became Prime Minister, 9, and I wouldn't claim to have really strong memories of her election in 1979, but I do have a vague kind of recollection of thinking, that's good, there's a woman in this really important job, which even, back then speaks to the power of representation. I think it's fair to say over the next few years, my views of Margaret Thatcher became less positive. I grew up in the west of Scotland, former mining territory, where I understand you know a bit of as well. And
my grandfather was born in the village.
We have just discovered that we have this in Dreghorn and in Irvine, or in part of Irvine Newtown. Unemployment was sky high there. There was a sense of, terror. If your dad lost his job, he would never work again. A real sense of hopelessness. And, when I look back on it now, a lot of the economic transitions then were inevitable, but it seemed to me Thatcher, didn't care. People were just thrown onto the scrap heap. And that politicised me and got me into politics. And the sense that this was all happening in Scotland when Scotland didn't vote for Margaret Thatcher drove my support and belief in Scottish independence as well.
Let's roll forward to a couple of years ago, and we'll talk about a lot of issues in the interim. But whenever I broadcast a programme from anywhere, if I'm in a cab, I always say to the cab driver, look, what would you want me to ask the politician that I'm interviewing? So today, I asked a Glasgow cab driver.
Asking Glasgow cab drivers anything is very brave.
Yeah, he gave me quite a few questions.
I bet he did.
But the first one was, why did she resign?
Well, I resigned for the reasons I set out when I made the statement saying that I was going to resign. Look, I'll cut to the chase here. 8 days after I left office as First Minister, the thing that everybody saw on the televisions around my house happened, I think it is entirely understandable that people think, she knew that was about to happen, so that's why she resigned. Categorically, that's not the case. I mean, the period between me saying I was going to resign and actually leaving office, people around me will say I was more relaxed than I'd been in a long, long time. I was looking forward. If I'd known that what happened was about to happen, I would have been unable to function. So I stood down because I'd reached a point. I was exhausted, to be honest. We'd just come through COVID. I'd been First Minister for 8.5 years. The COVID years made it feel much longer than that. I felt I just had nothing more to give. I felt, politics, not just in Scotland, but globally, becoming so polarised, so toxic. I felt I was part of that problem, not able to be part of the solution.
Well, you felt that you were becoming too divisive.
Yeah, and people were viewing every issue through a prism of what they thought about me. So if they liked me, they would back me on and vice versa. And it was very difficult to sort of lead rational debate. And, that was my responsibility. So these were the reasons I stood down. There was also a sense of, back when I made that statement, I was 53. I'd been in politics. I mean, I've been in Parliament since I was 27. I've been in, government I had been in government at that point for 16 years. I'd done nothing in my life really other than pursue a political career and then have a political career. And I just was at that kind of midlife point of thinking, if I don't, start to work out, I know everybody knows who Nicola the politician is, but if I don't start to kind of focus a bit more on Nicola the person, then I'm never going to do that. So those were the reasons.
I mean, essentially, you were exhausted.
I was mentally and physically.
Because there are various points in the book where you talk, I think, is it the 2015 election?
2017 election,
where you barely functioned at the end of that
I had this
campaign.
weird, and I still don't know what it was. I came back from a trip to the States with this kind of weird chest infection that just wouldn't lift, and I got a lung scan in hospital, and there was nothing that they could see. But right through that 2017 election, I was doing leaders' debates when I was struggling to breathe. But that was a sort of physical ailment back then. It was I was ill. Later on, after COVID had such a big impact on everybody, but it exhausted me. I went through 2020 without, and I'm not asking for plaudits for this. It was probably a really stupid thing to do. I didn't take a single day off because so focused was I on trying to kind of lead the country through that. And so I was exhausted, and I felt, it's the kind of job, if you're not able to give it 100%, you shouldn't do it because it needs 100%. So that's why I stood down. Obviously, the 2 years after that were, challenging for reasons that we might touch on.
When I interviewed you at the 2023 Edinburgh Fringe, I remember asking you, look, you've been doing this job for quite a long time. You wouldn't be human if you weren't thinking about when to go. And obviously I knew you weren't going to suddenly announce on the Fringe.
Much as you would have liked me to.
Well, Iain, yes, actually, I think I will. But... and you said, no, you were still full of vim and vigour. And then Jacinda Ardern, I think you think a lot of. I mean, she announced that she was going. Presumably that was something that also had a bit of an influence.
It's a strange thing. When I said that to you, I wasn't lying to you. I believe.
No, I didn't think you were.
And even just, I remember doing an interview with Laura Kuenssberg on the BBC just at this, the New Year interviews on a Sunday morning, and she asked me, Jacinda must just have announced her resignation. And, Laura asked, she used that phrase, nothing left in the tank. And so Laura said to me, what about you? Have you got plenty? And I was like, absolutely. And I believed that, or I was telling myself I believed that. But something that I'd obviously been working away in my subconscious for quite a while started to rise to the top of my mind in the weeks after that. And the Jacinda Ardern thing, I vividly remember turning on the news that morning and hearing her resignation statement. And I think it took me it must have taken me, I don't know whether hours or even a couple of days to articulate to myself what I felt. But I suddenly realised I felt envy at the fact that she was walking away.
Once that little thing gets into your brain.
And once that started, I think it then it became a question of when, not if. But I still wrestled with it. I went, one day I would be convinced, right, I'm going. The next day I can't just walk away. And so I went through a period of, I don't know, for a few weeks of of back and forth. But I think by then I knew in my gut that that's what I was going to do.
Let's go back to that day when the police knocked on your door. I mean, I can't imagine what was going through your mind at the time. Do you think they would have done that had you still been First Minister?
I genuinely don't know.
You must have asked yourself.
Do you know what? I've asked myself that a lot. Do you know what? In a strange sort of way, I kind of hope the answer is yes, because I wouldn't want to think that what happened was influenced in any way. People should be equal before the law, and there shouldn't be a difference in treatment. So had it happened while I was still First Minister, I mean, it was horrific enough when it did happen. It would have been, doubly 10 times if I'd still been in office. But there is a part of me, I think if I was to sort of get to a point where I thought, no, it wouldn't have happened, then that would raise really profound questions in my mind about... But I don't know. I can't answer that question. I do know when it happened. I think in the moment that morning, I went into some kind of shock because I remember fragments of it, but then there's other bits that I really struggle with.
And you went to your parents, which I think anybody would probably do in those circumstances. But you must have had several days when you really couldn't quite work out what was going on, and your husband was arrested, and obviously because there are charges pending, we can't go into a lot of the detail here. But I mean, what was going through your mind at that point?
I just a kind of confusion. What was this all about? This was an investigation that had been going on for a couple of years by that point, I think. I guess I felt more of a sense of frustration about it than any real concern, because I didn't believe there could be anything of substance there. And obviously I can't go into anything about substance for the reasons you've just said. So I guess there was a sense of bewilderment, confusion, and kind of horror and shame. My house pictures of my house were being beamed across the globe looking like a murder scene. So I kind of hunkered down at my mum and dad's for 2 or 3 days, I think it was, and the house I grew up in as a kid, and that gave me a kind of sense of security and comfort that I really needed at that point. And then,
what did your parents say to you when? Did you turn up on their doorstep?
No, I phoned. So in the morning, I was kind of, well, you have to go somewhere else, and then it was like, well, where am I going to go? And I set a lot of this out in the book, and my initial instinct was to protect my parents and not phone them. I mean, I didn't realise in that moment that would have been impossible, that within an hour it was going to be headline news. So I phoned the woman who had been my chief of staff as First Minister, and she, luckily as it turned out, she was in the gym, so she didn't answer the call, so I had to phone my mum and dad. And I'm so glad it happened that way, because being with my parents is the only place I really would have wanted to be. And they did what good parents do. They basically just, like, metaphorically and literally, some respect, just put their arms around me and, like, it'll all be fine, and just be here for as long as you need to be.
It took 2 years for you to be cleared by the police. Is that the right word? The police didn't proceed with any charges, and they said they weren't going to. Now, I think anybody who's been in that situation, it must be the most horrendous pressure on you. And you explain in great detail in the book the pressure that you felt and the effect it had on your mental health.
Yeah, I mean, it was... I kind of describe it. And look, before I talk about this, people go through much, much worse things, so I'm in no way unique here, but it was like a form of mental torture. It was never not in my mind. There were days where I was able to push it to the back of my mind. There were days where it was so dominant in my mind that I could barely think of anything else, but it was always there somewhere. I would lie awake in the middle of the night thinking about it. And it went on for a long, long time. And, I would kind of think, well, how much longer can it go on? I knew I'd done nothing wrong, so rationally I knew it would have to end in the way that it did end. But there is a sense of paranoia kicks in the longer it goes on. Well, are they going to sort of decide to say I've done something wrong? So it was a really tough time. I think though what I've tried to set out in the book, and I don't want to make it sound as if I think, it turned out to be a really good thing for me. I wish with everything I've got that it hadn't happened. But I did learn a lot about myself during it, and I did find a resilience that I've always been quite a resilient person, but I found a depth of resilience I did not know I had. And I discovered what really good friendship is. I had a really tight group of friends who, from day one, just kind of rallied around me and gave me practical support, emotional support. And, because of my focus on work over the years, I'm not convinced I've always been the best friend to other people, but I've learned the power of friendship, and I hope I can repay it to these people at some point.
Direct question. How much has all of that episode, what role did that play in the end of your marriage?
A big role. I mean, I say in the book, we'd both kind of stepped back from the front line. Well, mine was front line, his was back room, but still a very senior position, obviously, in politics.
Your husband was, just to explain to listeners, he was chief executive of the SNP.
And played a huge role in our election success, down the years. So, and this now is a question I can't answer definitively because, well, we don't know whether it would have happened, but it's possible we would have, coming out of these jobs and starting to do different things in life, we would have grown apart anyway. But the pressure of that period, I just think I maybe some relationships could and would have survived that. I would struggle to see how that would be.
Do you think Alex Salmond was right when he advised you, when you first took on the job of leading the party, that maybe it was time for Peter to move on as well?
I guess my only hesitation in answering that question directly is it kind of somehow takes us into the substance and starts to suggest that,
I don't think it does.
Well, because it would suggest that, there was wrongdoing or whatever in that. But anyway, I can see why people think that is what I've said in the book, and you can take from that what you want. With me, that kind of, determination to kind of pry into my personal life, I think went beyond what it should have done. And part of the reason I've chosen to open up about my personal life in this book is because I think after that, I want to try to redraw the boundaries. I don't expect I can ever be completely private and anonymous, but I do think for the next phase of my life, I want to redraw the boundary between the public and the private and actually reclaim a private life.
A personal question again, but since you announced your split with your husband, do you still talk a lot?
Yeah, we communicate. I'm concerned about how he is, and so from that point of view, we don't talk about the thing. But you can't.
Is that what you call it, the thing?
No, it's not what I call it. It's what I've just called it there because I couldn't. I possibly sometimes call it things that are less polite than that. So yeah, I obviously am concerned about his well-being, and so yeah, we do, but not about anything of particular note.
You do talk about sexuality in the book. You talk about you don't regard your own sexuality as non-binary, which of course, even by saying that, you've opened up a can of worms by saying that, haven't you? Because people now are speculating about, what did she mean by that?
The thing is, people were speculating before that. People have speculated. That's the point I'm making. It's people speculate whatever I say, whether I say nothing or say. So what I mean by that is, it's not a sort of big revelation about myself. It's not labelling myself. It's just that's how I see the world. I don't think sexuality is binary, and some people will disagree with that. Some people will never want to concede that, but I think that's probably true for most people.
But does that mean that you would be open to a relationship with a woman? I
am right now just out of a lengthy marriage, just out of a pretty torrid couple of years of my life. I'm enjoying being single, and I think that's as far as I'm going to go right now.
Everyone says that, but they never really mean it.
Do you know what? Look, a month from now, 2 months from now, I might not mean it, but right now, I do. I always kind of hesitate before. It's not the first time I've said it in the last week or so. I was so focused on work when I was younger that I probably didn't have as much fun as young people should have. So I think I'm living a delayed adolescence at the moment, and I'm determined to do it.
So you're on
bit
Tinder?
Longer.
Is that what you're telling me?
I'm not on Tinder. I'm absolutely not on Tinder.
I'm just trying to.
I wouldn't even know how to get on Tinder. Can you imagine?
Swiping and just seeing your face and thinking, "Ooh."
No, just for the purposes of any tabloid newspapers listening to this, I am not on Tinder. Don't go looking for me.
Oh, that would have been a headline, wouldn't it? Right, lots more to cover with Nicola Sturgeon. We're talking about her autobiography. It's called Frankly. It's out. Well, it's been out for a week. How's it actually going? Are you enjoying the whole process?
Yeah, I'm really enjoying it. It's a bit like an election campaign, and I've been reminded of how exhausting that is. And it's taking me back a little bit into a sort of world that feels like my old world, but with a difference, because it's a book, not politics, or not straight politics. But yeah, I'm enjoying it, and I've always wanted to write a book, and I've done it, and lots of people are reading it and buying it, which I'm hugely, hugely grateful for.
Well, lots more to come on LBC. I'm going to broach the subject of Alex Salmond next. So Nicola's got a couple of minutes to think about that one. What's the time now? It's 7:32. It doesn't tell me on my screen who the newsreader is, so I'm going to guess that it might be Amelia Fox. 7:34 on LBC. Apologies to Amelia Cox, not Fox, as I just said. I should know that by now, shouldn't I? We're talking to Nicola Sturgeon live in Glasgow about her autobiography, Frankly. Now, there's one name that permeates all of the political pages. It is, of course, Alex Salmond, who you say was your mentor. Obviously, the relationship, I think over time, sort of deteriorated, didn't it? There wasn't one thing that...
It deteriorated over time, but not to a point where we were estranged or anything. That only happened with the allegations and complaints against him.
And he was cleared of those allegations.
He was cleared of criminal behaviour, but I think in his trial and what he said to me, I think he conceded that his behaviour towards women had not always been appropriate. I think my regret was that he couldn't just reflect openly on that and apologise, and instead he launched this attempt to claim conspiracy. When he died, I thought hard and actually wished I could just have excised the chapter about the breakdown of our relationship from my book. The reason I couldn't is that right up until the point he died, he was claiming that I'd been part of a conspiracy against him, and to this day supporters of his are claiming that, and I felt it was necessary to set out I was going to say my side of the story, but it's the facts of what happened.
But of course, he now can't put his side of the story, and I think a lot of his supporters have been very critical of you for, well, they say you've waited until Alex Salmond has died to make these claims that you've made in the book. Now, I'm sure you would have made them anyway.
I wish he was still around to read it. I don't know that whether he would or whether it would make any difference to him. But I guess all I'd say is, it's almost every week one of his supporters claims that I was part of some kind of conspiracy. So I would love to never talk about this again, but I don't get the opportunity to do that. And I can't just sit back and accept that what they say, but by being silent, almost implicitly accept that it's true. I had written the chapter on Alec before he died. I thought hard about whether or not to keep it in, but that was my judgment. I also don't think I could write, and I've tried in the book, and I hope I've succeeded, to give him credit for the things he absolutely deserves credit for. It would have been easy for me, or tempting for me, I guess, to rewrite history, to say, well, I always knew he was a bad one kind of thing. But he was a hugely influential figure in my life. He was a force for good in my life for a long, long time. He achieved great things. We achieved great things together. So I've tried to be true to that. To pretend otherwise wouldn't have been fair to him or to me, for that matter. But I can't not give what I consider to be the facts around the reasons for the breakup of our relationship.
What do you say to his family, who have been critical of you for writing about him in this way in the book? And a lot of his friends have been critical. Jeff Aberdeen, who's one of his chief advisors, who I'm sure somebody you know well, he says, I was brought up that you don't speak ill of the dead, but if you're going to speak ill of the dead, at least make sure your claims stack up. And he's done a video of things that he says you've said in the book which are just clearly untrue. What's your response to him, and what's your response to his family, particularly his wife Moira?
I I stand by everything I've said in the book, and some of it, some of the political stuff, Jeff was around for some of it and, knows as well as I do the reality of some of that. So I stand by. Incidentally, I have no argument with Jeff Aberdeen. He's somebody I was extremely fond of and remain so. But I stand by everything I've said. I wish his family know. The reason I thought about taking this chapter out was because I don't want to cause any more hurt to his family, in particular to Moira, his wife. But some of the people who are being critical of me for writing my side of this are the same people who still claim completely wrongly that I was part of a conspiracy against him. So we seem to be in a position where they want to continue to be able to do that, but they don't want me to have the ability to defend myself and to say, actually, what happened. I take responsibility for my behaviour, and I try to do, and for the decisions I make. But what happened around this episode was rooted in Alex's behaviour, and not in mine. What happened to Alex was not my fault. And if people are going to continue to say that it was, I need to be able to set out the reality, because these claims of conspiracy that still happen today, the hurt they cause me is the least of it. They cause a lot of hurt to women who came forward with the complaints. So, I would love to stop talking about this episode in my life. I have no desire to keep talking about it, but I wake up many days to find some supporter of Alec or other continuing to claim that this was all some conspiracy against him.
Do you not think you should pick up the phone and speak to Moira about it and explain to her why you feel the need to do this? I
don't think Moira would welcome that. I haven't spoken to Moira for a long time. Again, she's somebody, obviously I didn't know nearly as well as I knew Alec, but somebody I interacted with over, my earlier time in politics. If there was ever, any sense that Moira wanted that, of course, but I don't think I would be, I don't think that would be a kind thing for me to do to Moira. I have no ill will towards Moira or to Jeff, but I am not going to just sit back and accept this version of events that what happened to Alec was somehow instigated by me or by my fault. And I don't think it's reasonable for anybody to expect that I should do that.
I read the chapter on Alex. There's the first chapter in the book, because I've been fascinated at how two allies, very powerful allies, clearly very close friends, had fallen out over the years. And I thought particularly moving was the last bit about your reaction when you heard that he'd died. And I think we were all completely... I remember hearing about it driving up the M4, and I was in tears on the phone, because I very much liked Alex. We had a few fallings out over the years, particularly over his going to Russia today, which I know you disapproved of. But the way that you write about it, it's almost as if it's sort of... He was someone that you were almost married to, but you'd got divorced, and then you suddenly hear he's died, and you react in a very emotional way.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't use that analogy, but we were really close. And obviously more professionally and politically than, you knew Alec. He wasn't a great one for, emotional kind of expressions of feeling, but I think we were friends, and I... as I've said in the past, I loved the guy as a close colleague and friend. And so, when we stopped talking, when the breakdown happened, which was, in short, because I wouldn't help him sort of push away the allegations that had been originally made about him. And he wouldn't and couldn't forgive me for that. And when we stopped talking, I went through then what I can only describe, and I do describe it in the book, as a grieving process. I used to have vivid dreams where, we'd be on old terms and good terms, and then I'd wake up, and that way you wake up from a really vivid dream, and for a few seconds you think it's real, and then I'd remember it wasn't real, and I'd be hit with this wave of loss and sadness. And before he died, I thought I'd got to a kind of place of peace and not feeling that anymore, and then I got a phone call from, Ian Blackford, as it happened, to tell me he died, and I was hit with that all over again. So it's deeply complex. I'm not sure I'll ever get to a point of being utterly at peace with the whole situation with Alec, because it was so complex. And, I had thought we would never reconcile. I remember saying that to you in an interview at the Edinburgh Fringe. And I think the reason for that was that for there to be any prospect of reconciliation, I thought he would have had to concede, well, okay, I should have behaved better and it wasn't a conspiracy. I didn't think he would ever do that. So I had come to terms with, we'll never be on speaking terms again. But it's one thing thinking that when somebody's still alive, but when they're suddenly not, and there is absolutely no prospect, then that's a very different thing.
Final question on this. My sense, when I finished reading that chapter, was this was more than a political friendship. You said you loved him as a colleague and a friend. Was there ever any romantic relationship with Alex?
Absolutely, categorically not. I mean, back in the day, I, was fond of the guy, loved the guy, but no, definitely not.
Okay. Right, we will move on to other subjects with Nicola Sturgeon in just a moment. We're talking about her memoir called Frankly. It's 9:45, 7:47. We're with Nicola Sturgeon. You met Donald Trump.
I never met him,
did you?
I had a phone call with him just after he was elected the first time.
You more or less have transcribed from memory, which I think was hilarious, the way you describe it. But he called you a bad First Minister recently.
I think terrible was the word he used, actually.
Okay, well, I was being kind.
Yeah.
How did you react to that?
I wear it as a badge of honour, and it was nice of him to do it just the week before my book came out as well. I thought it was great publicity. I'm going to have the quote on the front of the paperback because we just missed the hardback.
Right. Now, obviously, one of the issues that has caused you has caused a lot of controversy is your view on gender recognition. Now, you said in a recent interview that anyone who rapes a woman, quotes, probably forfeits the right to be the gender of their choice. In fact, I think you write almost those words in the book. What do you mean by that, probably?
Oh, look, I think that one of the mistakes I made, and I just was unable to communicate properly over this, was around Isla Bryson, the prisoner that caused all the controversy, who incidentally did go to a male prison. I think they were assessed in a female prison. I think within a day, actually. And the process they went through was exactly the process that trans prisoners have been going through for a long, long time. There was nothing different about that. The issue I find is I'm not concerned about Isla Bryson. They raped women, and I have no concern about them at all. The issue is, in the whole debate about trans, anything I say about somebody like that gets almost taken to apply to the whole trans community. Trans people are not inherently dangerous to women. Abusive men are dangerous to women. You will get bad people in every group in society. Some biologically born women abuse children, but in no other group in society do we try to taint the whole group. I'm a feminist. I've campaigned and stood up for...
You see, people laugh at you when you say that now, given your stance on these issues.
Some people do.
Some do, yes. Quite a lot do, actually, in Scotland.
But this is the whole... I think the whole narrative around this is intended to suggest that all women and, have a particular view. That is not the case. Many women take a different view. But
if you're going to be consistent on trans rights, if you believe in what you clearly do believe, they have to apply no matter what people's crimes are. You can't forfeit your gender by committing a crime.
I think I'm just... that person should be treated and should be in a male prison, and they are in a male prison. The point, and I'm trying to make a more general point here, which is the issue here is how the wider trans community are being treated right now. There is a real cruelty around this debate about one of the most stigmatised groups in society. And, some women, I believe a minority of women, can laugh if they want when I call myself a feminist, but maybe I'm just at the stage of my life. I don't care. I'm a feminist. I'll continue to stand up for women's rights, but I don't think that means I can also and shouldn't also stand up for the rights of the trans community. I don't think these two things are irreconcilable, and I will never accept that. The other point, which again gets totally lost here, is that the legislation that my government took through, which incidentally was supported by MSPs of all parties, it wasn't just an SNP thing, wasn't some groundbreaking measure. I've just come back this morning from Ireland. That law's been on the statute book in Ireland for years, and the sky didn't fall in. I'd like to think we could get to a more rational place on this debate where we absolutely...
But surely clarity might help take the toxicity out of it. I mean, I hesitate to go back to Isla Bryson, but do you regard Isla Bryson as a woman or not?
Isla Bryson's a rapist and is in a male prison, and that's where they should be. And that's, I am concerned about trans people who've done no harm to anybody, who are being tainted with the brush of what Isla Bryson has done. And I think it's really important.
But Isla Bryson claims she's a woman.
I don't care. Isla Bryson's in a male prison, and that's where Isla Bryson belongs, because Isla Bryson committed a heinous male crime against women. But if this was just about Isla Bryson, that would be one thing. But this is about a debate in which trans people as a group are being further stigmatised and effectively demonised in our society right now. And life might be easier for me if I just said, well, okay, I got that completely wrong and I should never have tried to make life a bit easier for trans people. But I'm not going to do that. And, people can say what they want about me on this
What's your message to JK Rowling, who didn't seem to like your book very much?
She's entitled to her opinion. I'm a great admirer of her work. I've bought Harry Potter books for all the young people in my life, and I'll continue to do so, though all my nephews and my niece are beyond that stage now. She's entitled to her opinion. What I regret is, I think, somebody in her position appearing to me to be punching down on trans people. You can express your opinion, you can have your debate, and I guess if she's having a go at me, she's not doing that, so that's one good thing. And maybe one of the problems in society these days is there's too many unaccountable billionaires trying to dictate political debate.
Who are they?
Well, there's lots of them. Elon Musk, for one.
What's next for you? Are you finished with politics?
I'm finished with politics, well, not until the Scottish election next year.
That's an interesting point, because one of the other taxi driver questions I had was, well, why is she still taking a salary from the Scottish Parliament?
Because I'm still doing a job as an MSP.
But are you?
Yes.
Are you speaking in Parliament?
Speaking in Parliament
Are you asking questions?
I ask questions. Speaking in Parliament is not the only part of the job of an MSP. My constituency is just across the river from here, and I represent my constituents, and I have always taken that job very seriously. So yes, I'm doing my job as an MSP.
And you will continue to until the elections next year?
I will absolutely continue to until the elections next year.
But then
I'm finished.
That's the dividing line. So no more. You wouldn't consider standing for Westminster?
Absolutely not. I have no desire. I never really had any desire to go to Westminster. I did stand for Westminster and would have gone had I been elected. I wasn't. But no, I've always wanted to pursue my politics in Scotland. I say in the book, one of the things the last couple of years has taught me is that you never know what's round the corner, so never say never to anything. But as of now, I am done with elected politics, and I don't see myself ever standing for election
Would you
again.
like a big international job?
No, I'm enjoying right now not having the constraints of, obviously I'm passionately supportive of the SNP. I'm a member of the SNP, always will be. But I'm enjoying not always just having to take a party line on everything. I'm enjoying not having the constraints of a big organisation. And, who knows, in times to come, I might change my mind. I've loved writing the book. I'd love to write more. I care about lots of different causes, and I want to, find ways of contributing in some way to them. But I'm enjoying a life that is, I guess, just freer than I've experienced for a long time.
I know the SNP don't nominate people for the House of Lords, but if Keir Starmer rang you up one day and said, look, I think you'd be brilliant in the House of Lords as a crossbench peer, I mean, I suspect you'd have to climb over Ian Blackford's twitching carcass first. But would you even consider that?
Sorry, I'm laughing. Ian Blackford is one of my dearest friends.
I know.
I'm still laughing at that.
I like him too, and he will have laughed.
He will enjoy that, actually. I would not consider, you will absolutely, there's one thing I can say definitively. Look, I disagree with the House of Lords in principle. I don't think people should be making laws when they're not elected, so you will never find me in the House of Lords.
But you have thought about moving away from Scotland, which is another surprise.
Not moving
in the book.
Away,
temporarily,
spending some short periods of time outside of Scotland. I mean, I'll
living
never
in London.
Possibly a period in London, but possibly elsewhere as well. I've just come back from Dublin, and I've been reminded all over again how much I love that city. So I don't think I'll ever be out of Scotland for very long. It's my home, it's where I belong, it's where I feel happiest. But again, going back to, I was so focused on work when I was younger. I never lived outside of Scotland when I was younger. I think there's something healthy about seeing your own country from the outside for a period. This is not a complaint, but obviously there is a lot of scrutiny on me in Scotland. I'm not complaining about that, but it might be nice just even for a period of a few months to experience life somewhere else and then come back to Scotland with a different perspective maybe.
Apart from not achieving independence, which I get, I mean, that's a raison d'etre of the SNP, it's why you joined the SNP, but it hasn't happened during your period as First Minister. Apart from that, what would you like to say sorry for?
I think on the educational attainment gap, which I made, and I don't regret making the big commitment to close that in my time as First Minister. I think I appreciated the need to do more to tackle what happens outside schools with tackling child poverty, the thing that holds many kids back, and did a lot. The Scottish Child Payment being an example of that. But I wish I'd been able to do more on the educational attainment gap. I think progress has been made and will continue to be made, but I shouldn't have made the commitment I did without being surer that I could meet it.
Cheeky question. Did your pal Val McDermott give you writing tips?
No.
Because it's a very sorry, this sounds very
She gave me one writing
but it's a
tip.
Very well written book, I think. It has pace, you can tell a story.
I had an editor from Pan Macmillan Publishers who was brilliant, but I wrote the book entirely myself. I wouldn't have... I recorded the audiobook myself. The idea that somebody else would tell my story... That's not an enjoyable experience, is it? I hate it. I didn't hate it. I mean, it's hard work, harder than you think, but absolutely categorically not. Val did not. She gave me one tip early on in the writing process, and excuse my language in advance, where I was struggling. I was kind of had writer's block, to use the grand terminology, one morning. So I texted Val to say, "Has this happened to you? How do I get over it?" And she came back with the very sage advice: stop fannying about on WhatsApp and just write. So that is the sum total of the advice Val gave me, but it was good advice.
So that's why you're so bad at replying on WhatsApp.
I'm terrible at replying on WhatsApp. I apologise. That was a justified dig at the end there, Iain.
Just a news story that's been in certainly the English newspapers over the past couple of days, that this phenomenon of people putting up English flags all over the place. Now, I've always thought this was a weird thing where if you put up the Scottish flag in Scotland and use the word nationalist, everyone thinks that's fine. In England, if you put up the English flag and talk about English nationalism, that's somehow seen as not acceptable. Have you often thought that's a bit odd? Yeah, I mean, I'm an independence supporter. I'm not a big flags person. I don't, routinely fly the saltire. I think in any country there's nothing wrong with having pride in your flag and being able to fly the flag, and I really hope England is an independent country at some point in the future. Well, there's a thought. Maybe that should be our phone-in discussion for the next hour. Nicola, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much. There's a lot we haven't covered, and I know people say, why didn't you ask her about this? Why didn't you ask her about that? But there's only so much you can fit into 1 hour. The book is by Nicola Sturgeon. It's called Frankly, published by Pan Macmillan in hardback at £28.